This is my true story. After everything I sacrificed for my son, I never thought he would be the one to break me. But 2 weeks ago, he kicked me out of his house and called me a burden. A useless old man taking up space. I walked out with nothing but a weak heart and shaking hands. I thought my life was over, but he had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks later, he saw me on the news, holding a check for $5 million. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. 2 weeks ago, my own son kicked me out of his house with an anger I never expected from the boy I once carried in my arms. I still remember the way he looked at me that morning, not with love, not with respect, not even with basic kindness, but with cold eyes that made me feel smaller than the dust on his expensive floor. He pointed at the door and told me I was a burden, a useless old man who did nothing but slow him down. His words hit me harder than any slap could. I stood there with my small bag in my hands, trying to understand how the boy I raised, fed, protected, and sacrificed everything for could throw me away like broken furniture. He didn't even let me finish my breakfast. He said he was tired of taking care of dead weight, tired of paying for a man who should already know his life is over. Each word came out of his mouth like he had been saving them for a long time, like he wanted to hurt me as deeply as possible. I tried to step back, but he pushed me toward the door with his shoulder, not hard enough to make me fall, but hard enough to make me feel unwanted in a way I never felt before. It wasn't just being kicked out. It was the feeling that I no longer had a place in his world. The house I once helped him buy, the home where I once cooked for him, cleaned for him, and stayed up late to make sure he got home safe, now felt like a stranger's house. I looked at the walls, the couch, the pictures, and realized none of it included me anymore. I was not part of his life. I was not part of his success. I was not part of his plans. I was just a shadow in the corner that he wanted gone. He opened the door wide and said he was done dealing with me, done supporting someone who brought him nothing but problems. That word, burden, kept echoing in my head. Burden, burden, burden. As if all the years I worked 2 jobs to feed him never mattered. As if all the nights I stayed awake worrying about his future meant nothing. As if raising him alone after his mother died was something he could erase with one angry morning. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. Sometimes the pain goes so deep, tears don't even reach the eyes. They just stay inside the chest, heavy as stones. I stepped outside, holding my bag close, and he closed the door right behind me without looking back. No goodbye, no last word, no bit of love. Just silence. A silence that hurt more than any insult. A silence that told me I no longer existed in his world. I stood in the hallway feeling empty, feeling old, feeling unwanted. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to walk. I forced myself to breathe. I forced myself to accept that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who push you hardest into the cold. When I reached the street, the sun was shining, people were laughing, cars were moving fast, but I felt like I was standing in a different world, a darker one, a lonely one. I looked at the sky and wondered how life could twist something so innocent, a father's love, into something so painful. I thought about all the times I put him first, all the times I said no to myself so I could say yes to him, all the times I believed he would take care of me in my old age because I took care of him when he had nothing. But love doesn't always return in the way it was given. Sometimes love comes back as silence, sometimes it comes back as cruelty, and sometimes it doesn't come back at all. I walked for hours that day, not knowing where to go, not knowing who to call, not knowing how to explain to anyone that my own son had thrown me out like trash. I felt ashamed, even though I had done nothing wrong. I felt guilty for needing help. I felt broken in a way I didn't know how to fix. But most of all, I felt alone. Truly alone. And as I walked, carrying everything I owned in one small bag, one truth settled deep inside me. The boy I raised was gone. The man who replaced him didn't see me as a father. He saw me as a weight he needed to cut off so he could rise higher. And that was the insult that stayed with me long after the door closed behind me. The days after my son kicked me out felt longer than any days I had lived before. Each morning, I woke up in my friend's small spare room, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how life could fall apart so fast. I felt like a man drifting with no place to land. I tried to tell myself it was temporary, that maybe my son would call, maybe he would realize what he had done, maybe he would show a bit of love again. But deep down, I knew he didn't see me as his father anymore. He saw me as a problem he needed to remove. The room I stayed in was small and cold. My friend was kind, but I didn't want to bother him. I didn't want to feel like a guest who stayed too long. Every night, when the house was quiet, I felt the loneliness wrap around me like a heavy blanket. I would think about the life I had before the dinners with my son, the little jokes we shared, the days when he used to hug me and say he couldn't live without me. All those moments now felt like lies I told myself to feel needed. Maybe he stopped loving me a long time ago, and I just didn't see it. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment to push me out. I spent my days wandering around the streets, sitting on benches, watching people live their lives as if the world had never been cruel to them. Young people laughing, families eating together, parents carrying their children. Every smile I saw reminded me of what I had lost. I used to be a father with a son who needed me. Now I was a lonely old man with no place to go. Sometimes the loneliness hurt more than the insult itself. Because insults fade, but loneliness stays in the heart and makes it feel empty. The cold nights were the hardest. I would lie on the thin mattress, listening to the wind hitting the window. I could feel the sadness inside me growing heavier each day. I kept thinking about how simple it would have been for my son to say, "Stay, Dad, I'll take care of you." But he didn't. Instead, he threw me out with no care in his voice. I felt like I lost him forever. And when you lose your child, you lose a part of yourself that never comes back. Sometimes I tried to call him, just to hear his voice, just to know he was okay. But he never answered. I wasn't surprised. When someone sees you as a burden, they don't pick up the phone for you, they don't check on you. They don't wonder if you have eaten or slept. They don't care if you are sick or lonely. They don't think about you at all. And that truth was the one that kept me awake at night, knowing my son lived his life like I didn't exist. One night, I sat outside on the steps of my friend's house, watching the stars. I never felt so old in my life. My hands shook. My back hurt. My heart felt like it was sinking inside my chest. I thought maybe this was how my life would end, quietly, forgotten, without family, without love. I thought maybe this was the price I had to pay for believing too much in the goodness of my own child. It's a strange pain when your own blood abandons you. It cuts deeper than any stranger ever could. Still, even with all the hurt, a part of me kept hoping. Hoping he would call. Hoping he would come. Hoping he would say he was sorry. Because a father's love doesn't disappear, even when it is not returned. But days went by and the phone stayed silent. My heart stayed heavy. My life felt smaller, and I realized I had to accept the truth. I was alone now, truly alone. And the boy I raised had left me behind like an old jacket he no longer wanted to wear. Those lonely days changed something in me. They made me quieter. They made me slower. They made me think about everything I had done in my life, all the sacrifices I made, and how none of them mattered to the one person I did them for. I felt like a ghost, walking through the world, unseen and unheard. Those 2 weeks felt like a lifetime. I thought nothing good would ever happen to me again. I thought this sadness was the final chapter of my life. I had no idea everything was about to change in a way that would shake my son's world completely. The morning after my son kicked me out, I walked to a small corner store near my friend's house. My legs felt heavy, my chest still hurt from the words he threw at me, and my mind kept replaying the moment he pushed me out the door like trash. I didn't go inside the store to buy anything special. I just wanted something to distract myself from the pain. I wanted a moment where I wasn't thinking about how my own child called me a burden. As I stood in line, my eyes landed on a small stack of lottery tickets by the counter. I didn't even care about winning. I didn't feel lucky. I didn't feel hopeful. I just grabbed one because it gave me something to hold other than sadness. I paid for the ticket with the last few dollars I had in my pocket. When the cashier handed me the change, I felt embarrassed. There was a time when I never counted coins. There was a time when I provided for a whole family without blinking. But now I was an old man with almost nothing, buying a lottery ticket like someone searching for a miracle in a world that forgot him. I folded the ticket and slipped it into my pocket without even looking at the numbers. I didn't buy it to win. I bought it to feel human again, even for a second. That afternoon, I sat on a bench outside the store and looked at people walking by. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone seemed like they belonged somewhere. I felt like a shadow between them. My mind kept drifting back to my son. I wondered if he was eating lunch in his warm house. I wondered if he was laughing at something on TV. I wondered if he even thought about the fact that his father was now sitting alone with a thin jacket and a heavier heart. The lottery ticket stayed forgotten in my pocket as more hours passed. When I returned to my friend's house, I put the ticket on the small table beside the bed. I didn't even check the draw date. I didn't care if it was a losing ticket. I was the losing one anyway. I thought the ticket would get lost under newspapers or fall behind the table. It didn't matter. All I thought about was how easily a son can throw away a father, how easily someone you love can make you feel like nothing. I sat on the edge of the bed and wondered how many other old parents lived like me, unwanted, pushed away, forgotten. For the next few days, I barely even remembered the ticket existed. I spent most of my time helping my friend with chores, trying to keep my mind busy, but every night, when the house became quiet, the same thoughts returned. The same pain pressed down on my chest. I wondered why my son changed so much. I wondered if it was my fault. I wondered if growing old meant losing your worth. The ticket stayed untouched on the table, collecting dust while I collected heartache. One evening, my friend mentioned the lottery draw was on TV. I didn't even react. I didn't plan to watch. I didn't plan to care. But he insisted we check the numbers, just for fun. I sighed, picked up the ticket, and sat down with him. I didn't feel excitement. I didn't feel curiosity. I just felt tired. When the numbers started appearing on the screen, I read them slowly. First number, match. Second number, match. Third number. My friend leaned forward and asked if everything was okay. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. Each number matched perfectly. My hands began to shake. Not from age, but from shock so strong it felt like a wave crashing inside my chest. For a moment I thought I misread it. I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But the ticket was real. The numbers were real. The win was real. $5 million. $5 million for a man who had been thrown out like a stray dog. $5 million for a father his son believed had nothing left in life. The same man my son called a burden now held more money than my son could ever imagine. I sat there staring at the ticket for almost an hour. My friend kept asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. My whole world had flipped in a single moment. The man who felt worthless suddenly held something worth more than any apology my son could ever give. I thought about how life works, how fast everything can change, how the same door that was slammed in my face would soon be knocked on with shaking hands. That night, I placed the ticket safely in my pocket. I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling again, but this time the ceiling didn't feel like a weight on my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt something warm inside me. Not joy, not revenge, just power. Quiet power. The kind that comes when life finally gives you back a little of what it took. I closed my eyes, knowing nothing in my son's world would ever be the same again. The morning after I realized the ticket was real, I sat at the edge of the bed with the winning slip between my fingers. I kept checking it again and again, afraid that if I blinked, everything would disappear. $5 million. I whispered the number in my mind, slowly, like I was scared it would break. I had never held anything so powerful in my life, not even when I was young and strong. But instead of feeling joy, I felt a strange heaviness, a feeling I never expected. Winning didn't erase the words my son said. Winning didn't erase the moment his foot pushed me out of his door. Winning didn't erase the image of me holding my bags, while my son looked away like I was a stranger. As the news confirmed the win, reporters started showing up. They asked for photos, asked for interviews, asked for a smile. I tried to smile for the camera, but my heart was still bruised. They didn't know my story. They didn't know that this win came right after the biggest humiliation of my life. They didn't know that just days before, I was sleeping in a friend's spare room, thinking about how easily a son can forget the man who raised him. The cameras flashed, the microphones pointed at me, but I felt numb. Fame didn't warm me. Money didn't comfort me. I just kept thinking about how life can turn in one quick movement, like a knife twisting without warning. After the interview, they aired my story on the local news. "Local man wins $5 million, the reporter said. She spoke with excitement, like my life had suddenly become a dream. But the real story wasn't the money. The real story was the pain that came before it. When the news flashed my face on the screen, people clapped and cheered. My phone started buzzing with calls and messages from strangers congratulating me. But one message stood out among the noise. It said, "Dad, is that really you?" My son. The same son who shoved me out of his house like garbage just 2 weeks earlier. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, remembering his voice, sharp like a knife. "You're a burden. You're holding me back. I don't want you here anymore." Those words didn't go away. They lived inside me, like scars that refused to fade. And now suddenly he wanted my attention, my forgiveness, my money. He wanted to pretend he cared because the world saw me smiling with a winning ticket. The shock was not the money. The shock was how quickly his heart changed when he realized his father was no longer poor. Later that evening, I walked outside to get some air. People driving by honked and waved. Some even stopped to congratulate me. I nodded politely, but inside, I felt hollow. Just a few days earlier, no one cared who I was. I was just an old man with wrinkles and slow steps. Now suddenly I mattered, not because of my life, not because of my kindness, not because of who I was as a father. I mattered because of $5 million printed on a check. That was the cruel part. Money made strangers love me. Money made my son notice me. Money made the world spin differently around me. That night, my son showed up at my friend's house. He didn't come quietly. He ran to the door, knocking hard like he was afraid I would disappear again. When I opened the door, he looked at me like a child scared of losing his toy. His eyes were wide, his breathing sharp, and his face pale. It wasn't love in his eyes. It wasn't concern. It was panic. Panic because the father he kicked out now had something he wanted. He tried to act sad, tried to act loving, tried to act broken. But his voice shook too much, not from guilt, but from fear. Fear that I would give the money to someone else. Fear that he had pushed away the very person who now had more than he ever dreamed of. Watching him stand there, pretending to care, brought the biggest shock of all. Not the money, not the cameras, not the news. The real shock was seeing how quickly greed can destroy a heart, how fast love can turn fake, how easily a son can change his tone when a dollar sign appears. I stared at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No anger, no love, no fear, just emptiness. The kind of emptiness that comes after you finally understand a person's true soul. I stepped back and closed the door slowly, leaving him outside with his fake tears and shaking voice. For the first time since he kicked me out, I felt like I was the strong one. I felt like life had returned something stolen from me. Not the money, the truth about who my son really was. And that truth shocked me more than any winning ticket ever could. The morning after the reporters came, the news spread faster than I expected. I woke up to the sound of my friend calling my name, telling me to come into the living room. When I walked in, the TV screen showed my face again and again. Every channel repeated the same story. Old man wins $5 million after years of struggle. They played the interview, the moment I held the check, the moment I smiled even though my heart was still hurting. The world now knew my name, the world now knew my win. But the world didn't know the pain behind the smile. They didn't know that 2 weeks earlier I had been kicked out of my own son's home like an unwanted dog. As the story aired, phone calls started coming in, one after another. Journalists wanted follow-up interviews. Companies wanted me to endorse things I didn't even recognize. People wanted to hear some inspiring story from me. They wanted me to talk about hope, luck, and blessings. But all I could think about was how my own son hadn't cared whether I had anywhere to sleep. I sat there watching people cheer for me on TV, strangers celebrating my win. But all I felt inside was an ache that money couldn't fix. Winning didn't erase loneliness. Winning didn't erase betrayal. Winning didn't erase the feeling of being unwanted by the person you raised. By noon, the story had traveled to nearby cities. My name was trending on the internet. People from my village messaged me, shocked and excited. Some who never spoke to me before suddenly remembered my number. They wrote long messages about how proud they were of me. But I remembered how those same people ignored me when I was struggling, how they didn't bother to check on me after my son threw me out. Now they wanted a piece of the spotlight. Now they wanted to say they knew me. I realized that money doesn't just change your life, it changes people around you. It reveals greed hidden behind smiles. Later that day, the biggest shock came when the national news channel aired my story. They replayed my interview, described my life, and added details that made everything sound even more dramatic. They mentioned how I had lived a simple life and how fortune finally smiled at me. But they didn't talk about the cruelty I faced. They didn't mention the night I stood outside my son's house with my bag in my hands and tears on my face. They didn't say anything about how he pushed me away because I slowed him down. They talked only about the money. They always talk about the money first. And then came the moment I knew would happen sooner or later. They mentioned my full name. They mentioned the city where I once lived with my son. They mentioned enough details for him to realize it was me. The son who called me a burden. The son who slammed the door on me. The son who walked away as I begged him to listen. Suddenly, he could not escape the truth anymore. His father, the man he humiliated, was now on national news, richer than he ever dreamed, and I knew, right away, what he would do next. Not even an hour later, my phone buzzed again and again. First a message, then another, then a call, then several calls, all from my son. He didn't say sorry in any of them. He didn't mention the cruel words he used. His messages said things like, "Dad, we need to talk. Dad, please, pick up. Dad, I'm worried." But I knew exactly what he was worried about. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about missing out on the $5 million he now knew I had. His fear was louder than his guilt. His panic was bigger than his love. The news didn't just make me famous. It exposed everything he'd ignored. It forced him to face a truth he didn't expect. The man he threw away now had more power than he ever imagined. I looked at the phone vibrating in my hand. I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear his sudden affection. I didn't want to hear a voice full of lies. Suddenly, the world cared about me. But the one person who should have cared from the beginning only cared because of the money. That night, I sat alone in the quiet living room, watching my own face on TV. I should have felt proud. I should have felt lucky. But all I felt was a deep, heavy sadness. The news had changed everything outside me, but it didn't fix what was broken inside. The world was celebrating a winner, but all I could see was a father who lost his son long before the cameras arrived. 2 days after the news spread everywhere, my son finally showed up at my friend's house. He didn't call first. He didn't warn me. He just arrived, pounding on the door like someone running from a fire. My friend opened the door, and there he was. My son, breathing hard, hair messy, eyes wide like he had seen something terrifying. And maybe he had. Maybe the idea of his father becoming rich without him scared him more than anything else in this world. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I heard his voice. Not calm, not gentle, not loving. It was desperate. It was shaky. It was the voice of a man whose plans had fallen apart. When he stepped inside and saw me, everything inside him changed in 1 second. His face twisted from panic to fake sadness. He rushed to me with open arms, pretending he was relieved to see me. But I knew that hug wasn't for me. It was for the money. His arms didn't feel warm. They felt like chains trying to pull me back into a place where he could control me again. I didn't move. I didn't return the hug. I just looked at him. And for the first time in my life, I saw the true person behind the son I raised. He started speaking fast, acting like he had been worried about me all this time. He said he regretted everything. He said he didn't mean the words he used. He said he was under stress. He said he missed me. But every sentence felt heavy with greed. His eyes didn't match his words. His hands shook, not from sadness, but from fear. Fear that he would lose access to the $5 million he believed should belong to him. The same son who pushed me out into the cold was now shaking because he wanted to pull me back into his life. I sat quietly as he talked. I didn't interrupt. I didn't respond. I wanted to hear how far he would go with his lies. He tried to make me feel guilty for leaving. He tried to make himself look like the victim. He tried everything except the one thing that mattered: real remorse. His performance was loud, messy, and full of fake emotion, but it couldn't hide the truth. Love doesn't return only when money appears. Only greed does. After a long stream of excuses, he finally said the words he came for. "Dad, let's work together. Let's be a family again." His voice softened when he spoke about being a family. But it cracked when he mentioned the money. He tried to hide it, but I saw the panic in his eyes every time he glanced at the check on the table. He wasn't worried about losing me. He was terrified of losing access to the money he never worked for. He sat down in front of me, shaking his head, wiping fake tears, acting as if we could erase everything that happened 2 weeks ago. But I remembered it clearly. I remembered the anger in his voice when he told me I was holding him back. I remembered the way he yanked the door open and told me to leave. I remembered him calling me dead weight. Those memories didn't disappear just because I now had millions. His cruelty didn't vanish just because the world now admired me. At one point, he dropped to his knees. He grabbed my hands like he was drowning. His tears started falling, but I didn't know if they were real or just another part of his act. He begged me to come home. He begged me to forgive him. He begged me to let him handle the money, so I wouldn't have to worry. That was the moment I knew everything. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was greedy. He was scared. He realized he made the biggest mistake of his life by kicking me out before knowing what I had. Watching him cry did not fill me with pride or victory. It filled me with sadness I didn't know I could still feel. This wasn't the son I raised. This wasn't the boy I carried on my shoulders. This wasn't the child who once hugged me without expecting anything in return. This was a stranger wearing my son's face, a stranger who cared only about wealth, a stranger who remembered I was his father only when it benefited him. I stood up slowly and walked past him, leaving him kneeling on the floor. I didn't yell. I didn't push him. I didn't insult him. I just let him stay there with his guilt. My silence hurt him more than any words could. That was the moment he realized something important. The man he kicked out was gone. And the man standing in front of him now wasn't desperate anymore. I wasn't weak. I wasn't begging for love. I didn't need him. Not anymore. The son who once called me a burden was now begging, shaking, and crying in front of me. But money doesn't heal wounds, and greed doesn't rebuild a broken bond. My heart didn't soften when he tried to hug me. It hardened, because love without respect is nothing. And his love returned only when $5 million appeared on the screen. When I finally decided to speak, the room went silent. My son stopped crying and looked up at me like he expected forgiveness to fall from my mouth the moment I opened it. But forgiveness is not something you hand out to someone who only remembers you when money appears. I looked at him carefully, studying his face, trying to see even a small piece of the boy I once raised. But all I saw was a grown man shaped by greed, selfishness, and pride. I sat back down, keeping distance between us, because his fake tears burned more than his angry words did 2 weeks ago. I told him to sit down. He did, wiping his face like he was rehearsing for sympathy. I didn't shout. I didn't insult him. I just talked. Calm, heavy, honest. I reminded him of the night he called me a burden, how he pushed me out like trash, how he didn't check if I had eaten, how he didn't care if I had anywhere to sleep. He looked away, ashamed for a second, but he couldn't maintain it. His eyes kept drifting toward the check on the table. Every few seconds he peeked at it like it was the only reason he was still breathing. I asked him why he suddenly wanted to reconnect. He opened his mouth, searching for soft words, but none came out. His lies had run out of space, so he said nothing. Silence revealed his truth more loudly than any speech could. I then reached into my pocket and pulled out something he didn't expect, the small folded note he left when he kicked me out. The one that said, "I can't take care of you anymore. You're too much for me. Please leave." I unfolded it slowly and placed it in front of him. He stared at it, frozen, as if seeing his own cruelty for the first time. He tried to explain again, but I raised my hand, stopping him. I told him that apologies without change are empty, that words mean nothing when actions speak the opposite, that a son who truly loves his father never uses age as a weapon. His face tightened because he knew every sentence was true. I saw his mind racing, trying to find a new angle, a new excuse, a new way to make himself look like a good son. But nothing came, because there was no excuse strong enough to erase what he did. Then I asked him one simple question. Would you be here if I never won this money? His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes tried to avoid mine. His hands trembled, but he couldn't lie. His silence was the answer. And that answer broke something inside me completely. Not anger, not hate. Just the last piece of fatherly hope I had left. I had wished somewhere in my heart that he came because he realized he hurt me. But the truth sat between us like a cold stone. He came for the money. I told him I didn't blame him for wanting success, but I did blame him for forgetting the man who raised him. I blamed him for letting pride grow so big that it erased love. I blamed him for turning me into someone he could push aside when life got too comfortable. But what hurt the most was knowing that if I were still poor, he would still see me as a burden. Nothing had changed in his heart. Only the situation had changed. He reached for the check then, thinking maybe I would hand it to him. But I pulled it away slowly. I told him the money was mine, earned by luck, but also by years of suffering that he wasn't there for. I told him I owed him nothing. Not explanations, not forgiveness, not money. He looked like the floor had disappeared beneath him. The reality hit him hard. I was no longer a weak father he could control. I had power now, and he had lost his grip. Then I said the words he never expected. You didn't just kick me out of your home. You kicked yourself out of my life. His shoulders shook. His breathing turned sharp. He whispered that he needed me. But I told him needing my money is not the same as needing me. And I could not reward a man who only remembered I existed when I became rich. He sat there broken, but I wasn't there to fix him. Not this time. I stood up, opened the door, and told him he was free to leave, just like he did to me. He stared at me in disbelief, realizing the roles had reversed. But I didn't slam the door. I didn't push him. I simply let him walk out on his own, because now he had to live with the truth. A truth he created, a truth he deserved. When he finally stepped outside my friend's house, the world felt different. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. For the first time, he didn't have the upper hand. For the first time, he was the one left standing in the cold while I stood firm behind the door. He kept looking back at me, expecting me to change my mind, expecting me to call him inside, expecting me to rescue him from the consequences of his own actions. But I didn't move. I didn't reach for him. I didn't ask him to stay. I just watched him face the same emptiness he once forced on me. He tried to speak, but the words slipped out weak and broken. The confidence he had when he pushed me out of his house was gone. His pride had cracked wide open, his arrogance had vanished. All that remained was fear and regret. Regret not for hurting me, but for losing access to the life he thought he could steal from my name. It was strange watching my son fall apart like that, not because life had been cruel to him, but because he had been cruel to me. It felt like the world had flipped itself upside down, returning everything he gave me back to him, piece by painful piece. As neighbors walked by and recognized me from the news, they greeted me with warm smiles and congratulations. Some stopped to shake my hand, some asked for photos, some offered kind words. And as all of this happened, my son stood there, ignored, invisible, forgotten. The same way he made me feel when he kicked me out. It was as if the universe wanted him to taste the same loneliness he served me with no hesitation. It wasn't revenge by my hand. It was justice by life itself. He kept saying my name, his voice trembling as if he were losing something more important than money. He wasn't used to being the one outside the door. He wasn't used to being the one unwelcomed. He wasn't used to being powerless. Every second he stood there, his face sank deeper into fear, like he finally understood what it felt like to be unwanted. I didn't smile. I didn't enjoy his suffering, but I also didn't feel guilty. A father can forgive mistakes. A father can forgive anger. But a father cannot forget betrayal, especially betrayal that comes with cruelty. When I turned around to go back inside, he ran forward as if to stop the door from closing. But I moved it slowly, not slamming it, not forcing it, just guiding it shut with calm strength. He placed his hand on the door, trying one last time to pull it open, but I locked it. The same soft click he once used against me echoed now in his ears, and his knees almost gave out. He finally tasted the weight of the moment he threw me away. From inside the house, I heard him breathing hard, heard him pacing, heard him whispering to himself as if trying to make sense of something he never saw coming. The father he thought would always bow down was now the father who stood tall. The man he thought he could control had become the man he feared losing. He knocked a few times, softer than before, weaker than before, like a child who lost his way. But I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. He needed to face the truth. He needed to understand that respect must be earned, not demanded. After a long silence, his footsteps faded down the street. I imagined him walking slowly, staring at the ground, replaying every word I said. I imagined him thinking about the night he threw me out. I imagined him realizing that money doesn't erase cruelty. And for the first time, he had to live with the consequences of his choices without hiding behind anger or pride. Later, I heard from one of the neighbors that he sat in his car for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel, wiping his face again and again. Not because he missed me, but because he realized he lost the chance to be part of my new life. He lost the chance to stand beside me when the cameras were on. He lost the chance to call himself the son of a millionaire. The reversal was complete. The father he abandoned was now the father who walked away from him. And the cruelest part for him? He knew this time I was not coming back. He knew the door he once shut on me could not be opened again by his tears. Life had flipped the script, and he could no longer pretend to be the good son. He had shown his true heart, and now he had to live with it. After my son walked away from the door, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. The check was still lying in front of me, bright and loud, reminding me that life had turned completely upside down in just 2 weeks. My hands rested on the table, steady and firm, and for the first time in many years, I felt like I had power over my own life again. Not because of the money, but because I finally understood something. Being someone's father doesn't mean you have to accept being treated like nothing. Being a parent doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. As I sat there, I thought back to the night he kicked me out. I remembered his eyes, cold, annoyed, full of impatience. I remembered how he shoved my bag into my chest and told me I was too much for him. I remembered the sting in my heart when the door closed behind me. And now, he had returned to the same door crying, begging, pretending to care. It would have been easy to give in, to let his tears soften me, to pretend that everything could go back to the way it was. But easy choices are not always the right ones. Sometimes the right choice hurts more, but saves you later. I knew I had to make a decision. Not about the money, but about my future. About whether to let him back into my life or finally protect myself from more pain. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want him to suffer. I only wanted peace. And peace cannot grow in a house where love is tied to money. Peace cannot grow when the person beside you sees your value only when you have something to offer. My son didn't want me. He wanted my winnings. And if I let him back in now, he would only hurt me again once the money ran out or once he got what he wanted. I stood up and walked to the window. From there, I could see the street where he had walked away. I imagined him still standing somewhere nearby, confused, angry, ashamed. I imagined him rehearsing excuses, planning new ways to get close to me again, thinking money would fix everything. But money never fixes the heart. Money just shows what the heart truly looks like. His heart showed me something I never wanted to see, a son who didn't value the father who raised him. So I made my decision. I decided that I would live my remaining years in peace, away from the chaos, away from the begging, away from the manipulation. I decided that my love for him would stay, but my trust for him was gone. I decided that I would no longer chase a son who only sees me when I have something he wants. I decided to close the chapter with dignity, even if it meant closing the door on someone who once held my hand as a little boy. I returned to the table and picked up the check. It felt lighter now, not because the money changed, but because my heart did. I finally realized that this money was not a gift for him. It was a gift for me, a chance to start fresh, a chance to rebuild the life that was crushed by betrayal, a chance to make choices without fear. I folded the check carefully and placed it in a safe drawer. No one else would decide for me how to use it. No one else would pressure me. No one else would make me feel guilty for living my own life. Later that day, my phone buzzed again. Another message from my son. Long paragraphs, apologies, promises. Words trying to sound sweet, but dripping with desperation. I read the message slowly, then locked the phone and set it aside. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. Sometimes the strongest decision is to not open the door again. A father's heart can break many times, but it can also heal if given space. And I needed space. I needed peace. I needed a life where I could breathe without feeling like a burden. That day, sitting in that small kitchen, I chose myself for the first time in years. It wasn't a cruel decision. It wasn't cold. It was survival. It was dignity. And it was necessary. My son had made his choice 2 weeks ago. Now it was my turn. In the days that followed, something inside me began to settle. Not joy, not celebration. Just a quiet sense of justice. The kind that doesn't shout or brag, but sits calmly in the heart like a truth that finally found its place. I moved into a small but warm apartment. Paid in full. No debts. No fear of being kicked out. No fear of disappointing anyone. For the first time in a long time, I turned the key in a door that truly belonged to me. The silence inside was gentle, not lonely. It felt like a new chapter written with steady hands instead of trembling ones. I spent my mornings drinking tea by the window, watching the street without rushing, without worrying whether someone would throw me out again. As the days passed, people from the neighborhood recognized me from the news. They greeted me with kindness, real kindness. Not the kind hiding behind expectations. Some brought baked goods, some invited me for dinner, some simply nodded with respect when they walked by. And I realized something important. Respect feels different when it's given freely. It doesn't feel heavy. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel tied to money. My son never gave me that. He gave me duty coded in resentment, help coded in anger, support coded in shame. But these strangers gave me something simple and honest. Human decency. Sometimes during the quiet evenings my phone lit up again with messages from my son. Long messages, short messages, missed calls, voicemails. Some sounded angry, some sounded desperate, some sounded like he was rehearsing lines to convince himself he still had a place in my life. But every message had the same shadow behind it, the shadow of greed. It wasn't love calling me. It was fear of losing the money. And I couldn't answer. I couldn't pretend those words he used, those cruel things he said, didn't change me forever. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes justice simply means walking away from those who hurt you and letting them face the emptiness they created. That emptiness followed him. I heard from a neighbor that he told everyone he was helping me manage the money. I stayed silent. I didn't correct him. I didn't expose him. I didn't shame him. There was no need. Life was already teaching him in ways I never could. People who heard my story began to look at him differently. They realized he had kicked his own father out. They realized he only wanted to come back after the check appeared. His lies lost power. His image cracked. His pride crumbled. Justice moved quietly, step by step. Meanwhile, I began using the money slowly, wisely. I donated to the shelter where I stayed once, making sure the old men there never had to feel the way I did. I funded meals for seniors, helped a few struggling families, and supported small local gardens. I didn't brag. I didn't post anything. I didn't tell my son I did it, because kindness is worth more when it grows in quiet soil. Every time I helped someone, a small piece of the pain my son caused softened. Not because money fixes the heart, but because giving reminded me that love still exists in this world, even if it didn't come from my own blood. Some nights I thought about him, not with anger, but with a tired kind of sadness. I wondered if he ever sat alone and realized that the man he kicked out was the same man who had worked 3 jobs to feed him when he was small. I wondered if he remembered the nights I stayed awake to check his fever, the mornings I carried him on my shoulders to school, the years I gave so he could grow strong. I wondered if he ever understood what he threw away. Not the money. Me. But justice is not about making him hurt. Justice is about truth. And the truth was simple. He lost me long before I became rich. In time, the calls grew fewer. The messages stopped coming. The silence between us became permanent. And strangely, it didn't hurt anymore. I had grieved the son I raised long before the lottery win. Now, I was simply accepting the reality life handed me. Some sons become blessings, some become lessons. Mine became both. Losing him taught me how to find myself again. Now, I wake up each morning with peace instead of fear. I cook my meals, tend to my small balcony plants, and watch the city lights at night. I don't need luxury. I don't need noise. I don't need applause. What I needed was respect. What I needed was dignity. And life, in its strange way, gave both back to me. My son kicked me when I was poor, but life lifted me when he wasn't looking. My final thought: love me when I have nothing, or don't love me at all.